creating ties with Asia. So after this lecture, you should be able to handle this part of the concept outline. Let's take a look at the ties that begin to be established even before the Civil War with Japan, China, and Russia, and will continue after the Civil War. Why is this happening in the pre-Civil War years? Wasn't everybody just worried about the expansion of slavery in the continental U.S.? That is a big concern, but the world goes on, and America continues to play a part on the world stage. Remember, this is the era of manifest destiny. For some extreme expansionists, they were already turning their eye to land maybe beyond our coast. We'll see that form of American imperialism take hold in the late 1800s. Additionally, as the Mexican Cession is purchased, as the Oregon Territory is secured, and the port cities of Seattle and San Francisco and San Diego are added to the United States, American businesses have shipping access to the Pacific like they never have before. And the Transcontinental Railway, although it won't be finished until after the Civil War, is seriously being discussed. So people are already starting to look at the potential of shipping goods by rail across the nation and then shipping them by sea to Asia. We also have improved shipping, which makes going around South America or sailing east around Africa to get to Asia much, much easier. The clipper ships were probably the greatest sailing ships ever created. They'll be eventually eclipsed by steamships, all of which are going to make long overseas trade, like trade with Asia, much more realistic. And a big reason why this is happening is that growing American industry that we've already been talking about. We have not yet undergone an industrial revolution before the Civil War, but American industry is growing and those businesses need markets. They need places to sell their stuff. One place that looked enticing was Japan. However, Japan had been really self-isolated since the 1600s. They had closed off their borders to all foreigners. There was only one port open to merchants and traders from other nations. However, America really wants access to Japan, full access to Japan, for a couple of reasons. One, ships are increasingly relying on coal as a power source to cross the oceans of the world. If you are using coal, you need refueling stations. You need recoaling stations around the globe. This is one reason why Hawaii was coveted by Americans early on. Japan would also be an excellent refueling or coaling station for American merchant and military ships. In addition, growing trade with China means that America needs another foothold in Asia. If we want to continue to trade with China, it would be nice if we also had access to Japan. Another industry that's going to pressure the American government to open up Japan will be the whaling industry. American whaling ships were operating in the Pacific, very close to the Japanese coast, and whalers frequently, probably more so than any other maritime occupation, have accidents at sea, fall in from one of their skiffs while hunting whales, or go overboard and wash ashore. American whalers that wash ashore would like to make sure that they're treated fairly and respectfully and can get back onto an American whaling ship. That's not really the case while Japan is still so isolated. Finally, France and Great Britain were gobbling up good coaling stations in the Pacific. They already had a head start. But if America can open up Japan to American naval access, then that would really bring us closer to the advantage that France and Britain enjoyed for their coaling stations. Commodore Matthew Perry is sent by first President Fillmore. He'll finish this journey under President Pierce. He is sent with the mission to open up Japan. He's going to use what's known as gunboat diplomacy, where you sail into a nation and prominently display your naval military power to show them that if they don't agree to the terms that you would like them to agree to, that there might be some death and destruction in their future. Perry does just that, sailing into Tokyo Bay in 1853 with an extreme display of force, the likes of which the Japanese had never seen. That image in the background is a Japanese depiction of the black ships, as they called them, these coal-powered industrial era naval military ships. Perry returns the following year after spending the winter in Taiwan. And all of this display of force eventually leads to the Treaty of Kanagawa, where the United States is given access to 2 Japanese ports. Now, that may not sound like a big deal, but that was unprecedented at that time. No European power, Britain or France, had that much access to Japanese markets and ports. By 1858, trade had been established between the United States and Japan, and U.S. diplomats take up residence in the Japanese capital that same year. Now, in the 1860s, I believe Japan underwent a change in their government and re-isolated, but the United States, alongside European trading powers, went back into Japan and, with another display of force, forced Japan to open back up to the rest of the world again. Let's move on to China. Now, since before even the market revolution, there had been growing U.S. trade with China. Chinese tea is coveted by American merchants. Plates and cups, what we call China, was purchased by American merchants to be sold in the United States. And Chinese silk is desired by many of the wealthy elites of America as well. The push for access to China is really shepherded by William Seward, who's going to be the U.S. Secretary of State during the Civil War for Abraham Lincoln, as well as for Andrew Johnson. Now, early on, Seward is an early proponent. He supports the idea of the United States taking more involvement in Asia. In fact, he was urging for annexation of Hawaii. Now, that won't take place until later in the century. In fact, he even predicted that we would one day build a Panama Canal because we would want to be in the Pacific so much. All of Seward's pressure and Seward's desire to have more access to China culminates in the Burlingame Treaty, sometimes called the Burlingame-Seward Treaty, which was ratified in 1868. Now, that guaranteed rights to U.S. missionaries in China, and it also set terms for Chinese workers coming to the United States. But probably more importantly, it lays the groundwork for diplomatic relations between China and the United States. One final Asian nation to talk about, Russia. Now, Russia had been involved in the Pacific for quite some time. In fact, since 1799, Russians had been operating in and around Alaska. The Russian-American Company, the first Russian joint stock company. It had no Americans in it. It was all Russians. But they were operating in North America, in Alaska specifically. They established relationships, sometimes violent relationships, with Native Americans in Alaska and purchased or sometimes forced them to give them sea otter pelts, which they would then turn around and sell, a lot of times in China. William Seward purchases Alaska from Russia in 1867, and that treaty, which gave Alaska to the United States, is ratified by the Senate in 1868. Early on, Seward is criticized for it. It's called Seward's Icebox or Seward's Folly, and people are wondering, why the heck did you buy a giant frozen landscape? But when gold is discovered there in the late 1800s, nobody is laughing at Seward after that. Again, you should be able to check this off from your concept outline at this point now.